This week in Pure Reinvention.
We are hardwired to resist change, and I think trying to flip that and say change can be good and use that as almost a mantra for the business can be a good thing.
Episode 52, Rick Winn, President, Amway Hotel Corporation, and Executive Board Member, Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this edition of the Pure Reinvention podcast, where our mission is to create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle.
Hello, Mike.
Hi. You know, we've had a chance to talk to so many cool people. Rick Winn, again, one of those. President of the Amway Hotel Corporation. Some real cool takeaways.
Rick was a good guy to interview because of his vast knowledge and that he's been in an industry for so long that he's experienced it at a lot of different levels. And I'm sure that makes him a really great board member.
I found that my interaction with Rick is always very positive because while he has considerable experience in the business world, he also has been this deep interaction with the Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association. He's been on the executive committee for a number of years. He's been able to help shepherd it through this very, very, very important stage. And I know, Misty, that absolutely parallels his work that he's done in his day job.
It's a good interview because you can learn from that board perspective, but I think that he's also reinventing in his space and in his career. So it's nice that he shared both sides of that story with us.
He was able to go on the professional journey of the success he's had because he is constantly staying on top of the trend to reinvent and stay not just competitive, but I think that organization is super competitive. And they expect people who are going to lead that group to also be super competitive. And so Rick brings that cutting edge, lean forward, got to get this done and be number one. And he's bringing that to the Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association. And quite frankly, that's a very big change for associations to have to adjust to.
That is a big change for associations and a very exciting one. Let's hear Rick's story and talk about it a little more on the other side.
What a treat it is today to have Rick Winn, the president of the Amway Hotel Corporation, here with us. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. Glad
Rick,
to be here.
You and I have had a chance to work together because you're on the executive committee of the Michigan Lodging and Tourism Association.
Correct.
Tell us about, first of all, what is your background at the Amway Hotel Corporation?
Well, I've always been in hotels. That's pretty much my career from day one out of school. And I spent about 12 years in St. Louis at another hotel company. And I came back to Michigan because I'm a Michigan native. Came back about 18 years ago. At that time, I was the general manager of the Amway Grand Plaza. That's about 700 rooms, kind of an iconic hotel in West Michigan. About, I would say, 10 years later, when we added the JW to the collection, I became the vice president and managing director for actually the three hotels. So it would be the Amway Grand Plaza, JW, and the Courtyard by Marriott. About 4 years ago, we took over management of Peter Island Resort in the British Virgin Islands, which is a beautiful resort, about 52 keys or 52 rooms, and three beautiful villas that are fantastic. So right now, I'm over the 4 properties, looking actually to expand our services to some more management contracts, hopefully, of other properties. We just opened a Roost Chris in Ann Arbor, which we're managing, and the goal that we have for the collection.
So it seems to me, from listening to you, that part of the expectation that the business has of you is to shepherd some of this through a growth phase, which
Correct.
is where acquisitions and growth is a very important part of your role.
Right, it is.
So as you look at the association that you are an executive committee member of, and you kind of looked at its performance, how would you have rated its performance as an executive committee member prior to reinvention?
Well, I think I've been on the board for at least 10 years, and I think at the beginning it was certainly sustainability was our goal, to try to maintain and really improve profitability so that we could sustain the association. I think gradually, as we improved things, that brought about a different goal, I guess, into one that, maybe we could grow the association to a different level, and that's currently where we're at.
How did the executive committee get to the point, Rick, where they realized it was time to go into a growth mode versus a sustain mode?
Well, I think when everyone was comfortable that the operation of the association was solid, I think we looked at it and said there probably is more that we can do. And I think anytime it's no different than a regular business. I think if you're not moving forward, you're standing still.
Sure. So in your responsibility here at the Amway, it's the expectation of moving forward, and you brought that same expectation to the role of being a committee member of MLTA.
Right.
As you looked at it kind of taking a new trajectory, were there some very specific activities that the board went through in order to start to kick off that new phase? For example, we did spend some time together doing some strategic planning and developing some new goals. How helpful was that to moving into a new trajectory?
Very helpful. I mean, I think, in order to transition anything, whether it's a business or association or maybe your personal life, I think you need to think differently. I think sometimes it's good to bring in an objective view to offer up a different way of thinking, and I think that's what that strategic plan process did for us. It's where we are today in improving and changing how we do things.
Now, you didn't just bring in a strategic planning process and have the activity and then go back to the same process again.
Right.
You actually implemented some new things as a result of going through that exercise. So the exercise wasn't the beginning and the end, but it was the beginning of. Can you talk about some of the new things that you as an executive committee started to introduce to the business to make sure that this new phase got its legs underneath it and actually started to grow?
Well, I think the first thing is actually mapping out where you want to go.
Sure.
So I think providing the 3-year, 5-year plan for what are the objectives that we want to achieve is number one. Mm-hmm. I think the difference, we went through a process over the 10 years of one could easily call micromanagement of the association.
Where the board was micromanaging.
Correct. And we went to a committee process at one point to try to, with only a very small staff, it's difficult to, sometimes get things accomplished in a timely manner. We went to the committee process. I think what the new plan does for us is really engage the board more on a higher level of thinking and using third-party businesses to help us accomplish what we need to accomplish through, of course, the executive in charge of the association.
So basically, it sounds like that the board or the executive committee was actually set its sights on a more macro level to start talking about where it wanted to go.
Correct.
And became less involved with the how, and instead let the business worry about how it did it. But I would think you're going to tell me you remained relatively steadfast on what the goals are.
Correct.
Now, how important was that message then for the executive to understand that the board was moving into a macro role and the executive now was responsible for creating the horsepower necessary to be able to hit those goals?
I think it still is, a transition time. And I think all of us, the executive committee, the executive himself, we have to be cautious that we don't fall back into the previous roles that we had, because those are ingrained over years and years and years of acting in that way. So I think setting the process into place was step number one. The executive has really tried to take the reins and really do what we've charged him to do. At the same time, all the while the executive committee is trying to play its new role. But I have to say, it's easier said than done, as always. I think human nature is you like to fall back into what was comfortable. We have had to be careful of, not doing that or doing it as the least amount that we can.
How are you able to help yourself and other board members to not fall back into some of those old patterns and to really be conscious of how you are supporting or facilitating the new behaviors that are necessary?
Well, I think we have to challenge each other. I think the board needs to really periodically do self-assessments. The executive committee, the same process. And I think one of us seems to be falling back into that pattern. I think the rest should be trying to call that person out and remind them that's not the same.
So basically, you've created almost a peer expectation where the working group of the board, the executive committee, is now monitoring each other for these new behaviors, that the association or the business isn't doing it. And that almost suggests that if you continually change who the executive committee is, it becomes harder to establish these new behaviors. Can you speak to how important it is to have some sustainability in your leadership? Now, I'm not necessarily talking about forever leadership, but how important is it in a reinvention time frame or a growth time frame that you have sustainable leadership where you actually can start to build off of these new behaviors that you're describing and have the kind of environment where you have people challenging each other, not to be counterproductive, but instead to be very productive?
Yeah, I think we consciously kept the executive committee together for the last 4 years or so and tried not to change out too many people so that we could, because you gained, you have a level of comfort with a relationship that, is established. So I think it's easier to challenge somebody that you're comfortable with, and I think that's what we've tried to do.
Now, when you think about your role here in growth, do you bring some of the same characteristics in your role in the growth of your day job?
Yeah.
Do you bring some of those same expectations as to how you are focusing as an executive committee member at the association level?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, certainly try to. I think those characteristics really are not exclusive to association work. That's really the way to move a company forward.
So if you were to pick 2 or 3 of those key characteristics that you see are absolutely imperative to growth in any business, and a recommendation that as an executive board member, that these are the kinds of things that create growth and create a new dynamic, what would you say based on your overall experience being in a growth mode are really the key to helping a business get ahead?
Well, I think not being tied to one idea is very important. I think having an expectation that change is good. I think inherently we are hardwired to resist change, and I think trying to flip that and say change can be good and use that as almost a mantra for the business can be a good thing. I think being open is another characteristic I think that we all need to maintain. You have to be open to someone else's ideas, or at least have an environment that people are willing and able and desirable to offer up new ideas for the business. And I think, that's the way that you can really improve anything that you're dealing with.
So the executive committee, which is this smaller, intimate group and has the ability to challenge each other and enhance each other's performance in that setting, sounds like they get their hands around some of the issues of the business and the ability to facilitate growth, maybe in a little bit different role than the general board. Can you talk about, Rick, how important it is for the executive committee to be communicating to the full board? And if the executive committee has more intimate knowledge of the business and its challenges and how it's shepherding it through its growth phase, how does the executive committee start to transition that knowledge and transition that confidence to the general board, which is a much larger group and meets less, has less intimacy of the specifics?
Well, I think communication is key, regardless of, we could be talking about anything. So I think the more that we communicate, I think as the executive committee, we need to realize that we are hopefully grooming future executive committee members on the board, and that, the more information that they have, the more interested they can become, number
Sure.
one, and the more knowledgeable that you are, knowledge truly is power. So I think our ability to communicate with them successfully is paramount.
When you look at the role of boards going forward, and you've had a chance to look at where boards have been, when you look at the environment of the next 5 to 10 years and the role of a board or a board member in that next 5 to 10 year period, what do you see very different in the next 5 to 10 years that maybe we didn't have to deal with 5 to 10 years prior?
Well, we talk a lot about the changing environment of the millennials, of course, and how they approach things differently. And I think we'll need to keep that in mind as we transition. I think we need more younger people on the board so that we can assess what their needs are and what their interests are and how they might help us evolve the board, because I think, again, it will change, and I think the millennials will be part of that change. So I think it's important that we recognize that and probably try to deal with that in today's terms.
How are you doing that here at the Amway?
The one thing we just introduced was our leadership. We have 10 people, all younger, up-and-coming managers that want to learn and grow and love this business. And we've created a leadership series that we go through and take them through every aspect of the business over 12 months. It's bringing them into a separate environment, going over, one series might be accounting, one series might be design, one series might be engineering, but we try to, in a day's time, sort of give them a encapsulation of what that's like and how that affects the overall business and how important it is.
So it sounds like what you do is you purposely select individuals who have the potential to perform at that level.
Correct.
And then you invest that kind of time into the specifics of the business to help them be well-rounded, give them enhanced knowledge, and then kind of see how they respond.
Right.
It seems to me like that's almost a great recipe for how we ought to be looking at training some of our board members, giving them a little bit more general awareness, giving them some higher responsibilities, and let them start to own some of their way into the executive level.
Yeah, that probably is a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you heard it first from Rick Winn.
Right here.
Thank you, Rick. We appreciate your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Oh boy, Rick had a lot of interesting things to share with us.
Rick is a great leader. He's had such success at the Amway Corporation, and he's bringing that leadership at the executive board level too for the MLTA. I think one of the things, Misty, that he's been very supportive of is the MLTA having a strategic plan that was simplified and very straightforward, had some benchmarks to it, but really allowed everyone to kind of help evaluate the performance of the executive director based on that very simple approach.
Simplification was clearly key in that, and also ownership. And I think the executive committee is doing a great job of owning this new plan and being very cautious, like Rick mentioned, of not falling back into old habits.
Rick has been on the board for a long time, so he knows what those old habits are. And he has said numerous times in our board meetings, if we get into a discussion which is reminiscent of where we were, he'll be the first one to point it out. And he'll be the first one to say that this is a decision that we have delegated to the business to take care of. And so this board, which has a long history of being involved, has to take a step back, has to measure the results of what the association does, not the activities that are within it. The other thing that he is really, really super involved with from a leadership standpoint is Rick is the chairman of their big event that they have every year, the Governor's Conference on Tourism. And that, Misty, has brought in almost 1,000 people every year, and it's one of the most successful events that associations put on. You think about 1,000 people, that's huge.
That's a big one, yeah.
And Rick is the board leader working with the association on that, and they have become a model for how other associations can build a very robust attraction for members to not only participate in, but to get value from. And it's a significant revenue generator.
Is that something that's grown? Because right in the beginning of your interview with Rick, he mentioned how they were in the beginning just sustaining as an association, and then they kind of had to jump over that hill from just being sustainable to growing. And was that conference part of that?
No. The conference was a part of their growth strategy, yes, because what the association decided that it was very, very important to start building their revenue stream and especially their net margin. And they recognized that they were using the success of they were going to use the success of their conference to build upon that. And since that was one of their core, real key initiatives that was very successful, we talked about how we could focus on making it even more robust and even more successful and even more of a net margin generator as we began to also build out other investments and other initiatives that would help make the association multi-dimensional in its ability to bring in revenue. And Rick understands that. This is a very simple and straightforward business principle that Rick not only understands, but he advocates for it. And he makes sure everyone else at the board level is in that same spot.
One more thing I'd like to talk about and get your perspective on was that whole idea that you talked to Rick about sustaining the leadership during this time of change. And I believe that that's really important kind of for what you guys talked about, but I was hoping that you could give me a little more insight on how that works, why that works so well.
Yeah, I think a lot of associations, and I think in the one particularly that Rick is involved with, will find that a lot of their leadership is involved in a few people, and those few people have been involved for a long time. And I know Rick is a big advocate of making sure you have good diversity and has been actively encouraging the association to recruit in and bring younger board members where the longevity of the association is more enhanced by being able to transition and have a more kind of a healthy turnover of board members so that you get new input, diversified input. Because for the strength of the association going forward, he knows actually for the health of anything going forward, that diversity, that inclusion is very, very important. I know it's very, very important to Rick and his management style.
Yeah, one last point that I think is important to bring up, you mentioned it just a minute ago, is that young leader is kind of a young mind, which I know there's other diversity, but he's doing that there or advocating for it on the board. And also he has that leadership program that he enrolls the younger people in the hotel industry and the service industry. Very
committed to the investment in his people. I'm very impressed with how Rick understands the most important asset that a business has, which is the intellectual capital that exists with the kinds of people you bring in. If anybody has experienced the Amway experience, they understand that it's first rate, and that happens because Rick Winn is first rate.
That is a great way to leave this conversation. We'll leave it at the first rate mentality.
Remember, if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.